Chosen one, God is speaking right now, and the message is this: it was never you who was broken. What lives inside of you was never built to fit their understanding. Don't scroll past, because this isn't random. Heaven wants to reveal something today about every time you felt misunderstood, every time you tried to explain who you really are, and the words just didn't land. You feel it, don't you? That ache of being surrounded by people and still feeling like a stranger. Stay here, because this can flip the way you read every moment that once felt like rejection. Type Amen in the comments if you have ever felt like no one truly understood who you are and what you carry. Before going further, understand this: the chosen one didn't land here by accident. There's a memory many carry, trying to explain something deep to someone close, and watching that look on their face that isn't bad will, just an inability to reach what's being shared. The wrong question always rises in those moments. What's wrong with me? But the right question was different all along. What's different about me, and why was it designed this way? This isn't about resenting who couldn't see you. It's a direct word from heaven to a chosen one who needs to know that being misunderstood was never a flaw. It was always a signal. Drop a like right now. This simple action helps carry this message to another chosen one who needs to hear it today. There's a reason certain people in the chosen one's life were never able to fully grasp who they are, and it has absolutely nothing to do with being too difficult, too complicated, or impossible to love. The truth runs much deeper than that. What lives inside of a chosen one operates on a frequency that requires a very specific tuning to be received properly, and not every person walking this earth was equipped with that kind of tuning. Think about it like a radio. It doesn't matter how loud the station is broadcasting. If the device in front of you isn't built to catch that frequency, the signal will sound like noise or never arrive at all. The chosen one was never the broken signal. The chosen one was simply transmitting on a band that requires a specific listener, and once that's understood, an enormous weight begins to lift off the shoulders. Because the conversation stops being about what's wrong with me and starts being about who was actually equipped to receive me. That single shift changes everything. Many chosen ones spend years convinced the issue is communication, believing that if only the right words were chosen, the right tone struck, the right delivery practiced enough times, finally the people around them would understand. But there's something painful and freeing to learn here. There are dimensions inside the chosen one that cannot be explained, only recognized. And recognition doesn't come from communication effort, it comes from level compatibility. No matter how brilliantly something is explained, if the receiver doesn't have the inner architecture to hold it, it simply won't land. This is why so many deep conversations end with that strange feeling of having said everything and still not being heard. The chosen one wasn't failing at expression. They were trying to pour ocean water into a teacup and wondering why so much kept spilling out. That image alone can save years of self-doubt. The problem was never the ocean. The problem was the size of the container. Not everyone was given access to the level where the chosen one operates, and this isn't about hierarchy or anyone being lesser. It's purely about design. The same way a violin string can vibrate to a certain pitch, and a different instrument simply can't reproduce that note. Not every soul was tuned to receive certain frequencies of human depth. Some people were built for breadth, some for surface connection, some for specific seasons of companionship, and some, the rare ones, were specifically built to receive what the chosen one carries. Imagine trying to read a book written in a language no one around you speaks. The book isn't wrong. The reader isn't necessarily lazy. There's just no shared vocabulary yet. That's exactly what's been happening every time the chosen one walked away from a conversation feeling unseen. It wasn't a moral failure on either side. It was a translation gap. And translation gaps don't shrink the value of what was being said. They only reveal who has the dictionary and who doesn't. So the next time someone fails to understand the chosen one, before sliding into that old habit of self-blame, a different question deserves to be asked. Was this person actually equipped to receive what I'm transmitting? Because that one question can completely rewrite the narrative of an entire lifetime of relationships. It can take years of perceived rejection and reframe them as simple incompatibility, not enemies, just different wiring. A practical step here, and this one matters. Start paying attention to the few people who, when the chosen one speaks, lean in instead of zoning out, who ask deeper questions instead of changing the subject, who reflect back something that feels eerily accurate. Those are the receivers. Those are the ones built for the frequency. Everyone else can still be loved, respected, even cherished, but they were never meant to be the mirror. And the moment a chosen one stops handing that mirror to the wrong hands, something inside finally exhales, for the first time in years. Type 777. If you are beginning to understand that being misunderstood was never about something being wrong with you. When the people who couldn't truly understand the chosen one looked their way, they weren't actually seeing the full person standing in front of them. They were seeing through the filter of what they themselves had lived, believed, experienced, and accepted as possible. And whatever lives inside a chosen one tends to stretch so far beyond that filter that what those people perceived wasn't the real version, just the closest approximation their inner lens could produce. Think of it like looking at a sunset through a foggy window. The sunset itself is breathtaking, but what gets through the glass is dim, blurry, only a shadow of the actual light. That's what was happening every time someone described the chosen one and got it wrong. They weren't lying. They were simply describing the version that managed to get through their fog. And that fog was made of their fears, their limits, their definitions of normal, and everything they had quietly decided was too much, too rare, or too unfamiliar to be real. There are people in the life of every chosen one who have known them for years and still carry around an internal portrait that's partly fiction. Not because they're dishonest, but because the complete version of who that chosen one is requires a context they were never given access to, sometimes because life never placed them in the same fire, sometimes because they protected themselves from depths they weren't ready to face. The chosen one learns eventually to stop being frustrated by this and to recognize it for what it is, a limitation of perspective, not a failure of love. A father can love his son deeply and still not understand a single thing about who that son truly is on the inside. A best friend can be loyal for 2 decades and still hold a version of the chosen one that froze in time somewhere around year 3. None of that erases the love. It just clarifies the boundary of what that love can actually see. And acceptance of that boundary is a kind of peace most people never reach. What those people saw when they looked at the chosen one was a filtered version, smaller than the real one, less complex than the real one, less capable than the real one. And here's where it gets genuinely heavy. Many chosen ones, after hearing those filtered versions described back to them year after year, slowly began to believe that filtered version was the truth. A daughter who keeps hearing she's too sensitive eventually starts apologizing for her depth. A young man told repeatedly he's too intense eventually learns to dim himself before walking into a room. A dreamer who keeps hearing dreams are unrealistic eventually starts choosing smaller dreams just to avoid the eye roll. That's the real damage of being seen through a foggy lens. Not the foggy view itself, but the moment the chosen one starts using that fog as their own mirror. And once that mirror is internalized, an entire identity gets built on top of someone else's limitation. So this is the question every chosen one needs to sit with for a moment, honestly and without flinching. How many beliefs about myself were actually formed by people who only had access to a fraction of who I really am? That single question, taken seriously, can dismantle years of quiet self-doubt. A practical exercise that has changed lives is this: write down the 3 most painful things ever said about who the chosen one is, then beside each one, write down the actual person who said it. And ask plainly, did that person ever have the depth, the context, the inner equipment to make that judgment accurately? Most of the time, the answer is a clear no. And when the verdict came from a court that lacked the qualifications to issue it, the verdict can be returned. The definition of identity belongs back in the hands of the one who designed it, and any version handed out by someone with limited access can finally be released, with grace, but firmly. There's a purpose behind being misunderstood that goes far beyond the discomfort it causes, and once a chosen one sees it clearly, the whole experience transforms from a wound into an invitation. When understanding can't be found in the human sources around the chosen one, something profound happens. They're naturally redirected toward the only source whose understanding is complete. The one who knew the chosen one before they were even formed, who sees every layer being carried, who grasps every nuance of every emotion without needing a single word to be spoken. Think about it like a child wandering in a crowd of strangers, calling out for someone who knows their name, and slowly realizing that the only voice that will answer with full recognition is the Father's. The misunderstanding wasn't punishment. It was a hand on the shoulder, gently turning the chosen one toward the one who never needed an explanation in the first place. The seasons in which a chosen one feels most misunderstood by everyone around them are very often the same seasons in which they draw closest to God. And that pattern isn't a coincidence. It's a design. The loneliness of not being seen creates a hunger that nothing human can fully satisfy, and that hunger drives the soul toward a presence that finally fits. Many chosen ones look back years later and realize that the deepest spiritual encounters of their life happened during the loneliest stretches, not because God caused the isolation, but because the isolation removed every distraction and every cheap substitute that had been getting in the way of true intimacy with Him. A practical illustration here: when a phone signal gets interrupted by too many noisy frequencies, sometimes the only way to receive the real message clearly is to step away from the noise. That's what those misunderstood seasons were doing, clearing the line, cleaning the channel, preparing the chosen one to finally hear what couldn't be heard before. God allowed certain people to be unable to understand the chosen one, not as a punishment of loneliness, but as a redirection toward the only understanding that doesn't filter, doesn't distort, doesn't run out of patience, and doesn't expire when the chosen one becomes inconvenient. Every other source of understanding has limits. Even the most loving human relationships have a ceiling, a bandwidth, a season, but the understanding of God arrives without conditions and stays without exhaustion. And the chosen one who has been deeply hurt by being misunderstood often becomes the one who develops the deepest, most unshakable relationship with Him, because they finally stopped trying to extract from people what only heaven was equipped to give. That shift, when it lands, doesn't just heal old wounds. It rewrites the entire emotional architecture of a person. The chosen one stops needing to be fully known by everyone because they are already fully known by the one who matters most. The misunderstanding the chosen one has lived through was a redirection toward the only one who knows them completely, toward the only one whose understanding doesn't depend on the right words being chosen, the right performance being delivered, or the right category being met. He understands before a single syllable is spoken. He knew the prayer before it was prayed. And that complete understanding is available right now, not someday, not after enough spiritual progress, but in this exact moment. A practical step worth taking today is this: find 10 silent minutes, no phone, no distractions, and simply say out loud, "God, you see me completely. I receive that today." Then stay silent and let that truth settle. Most chosen ones discover that something ancient inside them, something that's been holding its breath for years waiting to be seen, finally exhales. That exhale is the beginning of a new chapter, and that chapter doesn't require a single human to understand the chosen one for it to be real. If being misunderstood has ever brought you closer to God, type "He understands me completely" down below. There's a very specific kind of loneliness that belongs to those who are different, and it isn't the loneliness of having no one around. It's the much sharper kind of being completely surrounded by people and still carrying something that finds no echo in any of them. It's one of the most formative experiences a chosen one can pass through, and unfortunately, it's also one of the most misread, both by the chosen one themselves and by the people watching from outside. From the outside, it can look like antisocial behavior or unnecessary distance. From the inside, it feels like standing in a crowded room while every voice speaks a dialect of a language only partially understood. That kind of solitude doesn't get fixed by adding more people to the room. It only ends when one person finally arrives who speaks the same inner dialect. And until that moment, the chosen one walks through life with a quiet ache that most around them don't even notice. Many chosen ones grow up with a persistent sense that something is fundamentally strange about who they are. Not in a way that can be neatly articulated, just a steady inner whisper that says, you see things from an angle others don't. You feel things at a depth others don't reach. You want things others around you can't even imagine wanting. For a long stretch of life, this gets interpreted as a defect, a flaw, something to fix, hide, or apologize for. But there's a sacred turning point when the chosen one finally understands that what felt like defect was actually differentiation, and that differentiation is exactly what makes the calling on their life unique. Picture a tree growing in a forest where every other tree is the same species, and one tree stubbornly grows differently. For years it might feel out of place. But that one different tree is the one travelers stop to take photos of, the one birds pick to nest in, the one stories get told about. The difference wasn't the curse, it was the whole point. The loneliness of being different produced something inside the chosen one that the easy belonging of fitting in could never have produced, and this is something most people never realize until much later in life. It built depth of thought because there was no one around to outsource the thinking to. It built sharpness of observation because surviving as the different one required reading rooms others never had to read. It built emotional resilience because every misread, every dismissive comment, every awkward silence was a small training session in carrying weight without collapsing. And maybe most importantly, it built a genuine stubborn search for something larger than the immediate environment, because the environment wasn't supplying enough oxygen for the soul. A practical example. Notice how the people who end up writing books that change lives, building movements that shift culture, or speaking truths that wake people up are almost never the ones who fit in easily. They're the ones who spent years on the outside, gathering material the comfortable insiders never had access to. So the question every chosen one deserves to sit with is this: what did the loneliness of being different actually develop in me? Because what was forged in that specific kind of solitude isn't weakness. It's the exact toolkit that will be used to reach the people who are right now walking through the same loneliness the chosen one already survived. A practical action worth taking is to make a short list. 3 traits that grew during the loneliest seasons of life. Maybe it's empathy, maybe it's discernment, maybe it's a creative voice, maybe it's the ability to hold space for someone in pain without flinching. Those traits weren't accidental byproducts of suffering, they were equipment being shaped for a future assignment. And the moment the chosen one stops resenting the season that built them and starts using the equipment that came out of it, the entire purpose of the loneliness becomes visible. What once felt like exile finally reveals itself as preparation. And preparation always points to a calling waiting on the other side. For every single person who failed to understand the chosen one, there are people who were specifically designed to receive exactly what they carry. And this isn't poetic exaggeration, it's a real spiritual principle that plays out in every chosen one's life eventually. These are people who hear the chosen one speak, and don't just understand intellectually, they recognize the way someone listens to a song and feels like it was written about their own private story. That kind of recognition is rare, but it isn't accidental. It's arranged. It's the kind of encounter heaven prepares quietly behind the scenes, while the chosen one is still trying to make sense of why the wrong people kept showing up first. And part of the entire purpose of the misunderstanding endured up until now was preparation. Preparation for the chosen one to actually recognize the right people when they finally walk in, instead of mistaking them for just another conversation. The deepest connections in the lives of most chosen ones don't end up happening with the people who shared the most surface in common with them. They happen with people who, the moment the chosen one started speaking honestly, looked at them in a way no one had looked before, as if finally hearing someone articulate out loud something they had always felt but never managed to put into words. That kind of mutual recognition is one of the most powerful experiences a human being can have on this side of eternity. And here's something worth absorbing. That experience never lands as deeply for people who had it easy their whole lives. It lands like lightning specifically because the chosen one spent so long without it. The years of being unseen sharpened the ability to recognize true sight when it finally arrived. So the painful seasons weren't just suffering, they were calibration, and calibrated instruments pick up signals that uncalibrated ones miss entirely. The people who were truly made to understand the chosen one are not necessarily the ones who are geographically closest, or the ones who show up first in the family tree, or the ones who have known them the longest. Sometimes they're in places the chosen one hasn't even visited yet, in contexts not yet stepped into, in seasons of life still waiting on the calendar. This is why it matters so much not to settle for unsatisfying connections out of fear that nothing better is coming. A practical example. Many chosen ones look back at their 30s or 40s and realize that the friendships, mentors, and partnerships that defined them most deeply didn't even exist yet in their 20s. The right people often arrive on a timeline that requires patience and trust, and that timing isn't a delay, it's a protection, because meeting the right person too early often means meeting them before either side has been shaped enough to recognize the gift. So this matters, and it deserves to be said clearly. Don't close off the heart to understanding just because being misunderstood left scars. The right people are coming, or in some cases, they're already standing nearby, quietly waiting for the chosen one to allow themselves to be fully seen instead of partially shown. A practical step worth taking is to identify even one person in life right now who has shown signs of true recognition, someone who reflects the chosen one back accurately, who asks deeper questions, who doesn't flinch at depth. Then, take a small risk. Share something one layer truer than usual and watch how that person receives it. The risk of opening up again is real, of course. But what's waiting on the other side of that risk is the kind of connection the chosen one was built for from the very beginning, and nothing about staying guarded forever was ever part of the design. Type "I am open" in the comments if you are ready to be truly seen and understood by the people God has specifically chosen to receive what you carry. There are people in the life of every chosen one who are simply never going to understand them fully, and this isn't a tragedy waiting for a solution. It's a reality waiting for acceptance with peace and wisdom. Trying to force comprehension out of someone who wasn't equipped to receive it is one of the most exhausting expenditures of energy a human being can engage in. It's also one of the most efficient ways to stay stuck in a place that should have been left behind years ago. Picture pouring water into a cup that has no bottom. No matter how much keeps getting poured, nothing fills, and eventually the one pouring runs dry, while the cup remains exactly as empty as it was at the start. That's what happens every time the chosen one keeps trying to explain themselves to someone whose container simply doesn't hold that kind of water. The exhaustion isn't a sign of failure, it's a sign that the wrong well is being drawn from. So many chosen ones spend years of their life trying to make certain people understand them, re-explaining, rephrasing, finding new angles in the desperate hope that this time something will finally click. And here's the hard but freeing truth. Vision cannot be transferred to someone who lacks the equipment to receive it. The chosen one can love those people. The chosen one can deeply respect those people. The chosen one can stay loyal, kind, and present with those people. But what cannot keep happening is making them the courtroom where personal worth gets approved or denied. A practical example worth holding on to. Imagine a daughter who keeps presenting her life choices to a parent who was raised in a completely different paradigm, hoping for a stamp of approval that's never going to arrive in the form she needs. The parent isn't evil. The parent is simply running on different software. And waiting for the wrong software to validate the right code is a form of self-imprisonment that no one else can unlock. Releasing certain people from the expectation of understanding the chosen one completely is not the same thing as giving up on them, abandoning them, or loving them less. And this distinction matters enormously because a lot of chosen ones avoid this release out of guilt. Releasing them is actually giving them the space to be exactly what they are, while also giving the chosen one the space to stop needing an approval that was never going to arrive in the form being requested. It's a generous act in both directions. The other person gets to stop being held to a standard they were never built to meet, and the chosen one gets to stop bleeding out in pursuit of a verdict that doesn't have the authority to be issued anyway. A practical step here. Write down 2 or 3 names of people whose understanding has been chased for too long. Then, for each name, simply say out loud, "I release you from needing to understand me, and I release myself from needing your understanding to feel whole." So the question every chosen one needs to confront honestly is this: who do I need to release from the expectation of understanding me? Because that release isn't only for them, it's primarily for the chosen one. It's what finally cuts the chain that's been keeping the chosen one tied to a version of themselves, built around someone else's limits. Once that chain breaks, the energy that was being spent on trying to be understood becomes available for actually living the calling that was placed inside. A practical truth worth meditating on: many chosen ones discover that the relationships they kept trying to fix actually got healthier the moment they stopped demanding to be understood. Without the constant pressure, those relationships found a more honest, sustainable shape, and some of them even surprised the chosen one years later by growing into something deeper than expected. But that growth only became possible after the demand for understanding was finally released. Pressure was never the path to closeness. Acceptance was. After understanding why the misunderstanding happened, there's a response heaven is now waiting for. And it isn't anger, it isn't resentment, it isn't a quiet posture of superiority over the people who couldn't see clearly. It's something far more powerful: gratitude, forgiveness, and a complete acceptance of the chosen one's own uniqueness as something that stops being a source of shame and becomes a source of purpose. That shift is the doorway, and most chosen ones spend years standing right in front of it without ever walking through. Because walking through means letting go of the comfortable identity of the one who was misunderstood and stepping into the much more demanding identity of the one who knows exactly who they are and refuses to apologize for it anymore. That's the real assignment now. And it's an assignment that can only begin when the chosen one stops looking backward at who didn't see them and starts looking forward at who they're being called to become. There's a specific moment in the journey of every chosen one when they finally stop being ashamed of how they're built, the intensity, the depth, the way of processing the world that isn't always easy for others to keep up with. And the second that shame drops, those very same traits begin to be used as fuel instead of being suppressed as flaws. And the impact those traits start producing becomes wildly disproportionate to anything a watered-down, more palatable version of the chosen one would ever have been able to create. A practical example: think of every author, leader, or voice that ever genuinely moved a generation. None of them got there by trimming themselves down to be more comfortable for the room. They got there by finally accepting the very thing about themselves they used to hide and letting it become the engine of their work. The chosen one carries the same kind of engine inside. The only question left is whether they'll keep the cover bolted down or finally let it run. God is asking the chosen one now to stop apologizing for who they are. And this isn't a vague spiritual platitude, it's a concrete daily practice. Stop minimizing what makes the chosen one different. Stop searching for understanding from the wrong sources. Stop walking into every room ready to shrink before anyone has even asked them to. Start operating from the only understanding that's complete, His understanding of them. That's the foundation strong enough to stand on no matter who fails to see clearly. A practical step worth taking starting today. Catch every moment a self-apology is about to slip out. Sorry I'm too much, sorry I'm too deep, sorry I feel things this strongly, and replace it with silence or with something honest. Most chosen ones discover that those small apologies were the hidden tax they were paying for years just to be allowed in rooms that never deserved them in the first place. Stopping that tax is one of the fastest ways to recover energy that's been quietly bleeding out for a lifetime. The chosen one was never made to be easy to understand. The chosen one was made to be impossible to ignore once they finally start operating fully in everything that was placed inside of them. And the difference between those two states, easy to ignore versus impossible to ignore, is honestly not a difference of talent, luck, or timing. It's the simple difference between staying hidden and finally showing up completely. A practical truth worth carrying forward. Every single moment of life from this point on can be lived from one of two postures, and only one of them was ever intended. The first posture is the old one, the apologetic shrinking that's been worn for years like a second skin. The second posture is the one God has been waiting for: full presence, full identity, full acceptance of the design that was placed in the chosen one before they were even born. The choice between those two postures gets made fresh every morning, and starting now, the only honest choice left is the second one. Type "I stop apologizing for who I am" in the comments. Let that be your declaration of faith and identity today. Chosen one, remember what God said at the start. It was never you who was wrong. It was simply that what lives inside of you was never built to fit their understanding. Every moment you felt misunderstood was never proof of a flaw. It was confirmation of a design operating at a level few can reach. So stop shrinking, stop hiding, stop apologizing for the depth God placed in you on purpose. Close your eyes for 10 seconds and say out loud, "God, I receive the truth. I stop apologizing for who you made me to be. I step into my full identity today. Amen." Drop a like now. That simple action helps carry this message to another chosen one who needs to hear it today. Subscribe and turn on the bell. The next messages are for chosen ones ready to stop hiding and finally show up completely. Comment one word that describes what you felt watching this video. Just one word. I read every single one.